Justin. I am a digital projects librarian, and my pronouns are he and they.
I am Jay. I am a cataloging librarian, and my pronouns are he, him.
And we have a guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kelly Jensen, and my pronouns are she, her.
Welcome. It's been so long, I don't even remember how to do my own show.
You were out here, and then we forgot how to podcast.
Yeah, it just gave me an update. Zoom just gave me like a thing, and it freaked me out. But I think it's fine.
Okay.
So welcome. We were wanting to do an IMLS episode, and it was going to rely on your writing so much. We were like, we should just have Kelly on, because otherwise we're just going to be reading the articles.
I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm glad to be here, but not glad to be here, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
Like, I wish we
We'll bring
weren't
you on for
talking
a fun
about
one.
this.
Our show used to be fun, we promise.
It used to be so fun talking about libraries, but I feel like that has not been the case in like 4.5 years. So actually, I should be fair, even before then, because we had COVID-19 in 2020. So it's been a while since we've had a lot of fun in the library world.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were always complaining. I don't know what Jay's talking about. We made up things to get mad about when there wasn't anything to get mad about, so it was fine. For people who aren't aware of who you are, though, why don't you tell us about what you do?
Sure. I am an editor at Bookright. I've been there for 10 years full time, probably 11 and a half years, all told. Before I took that job, I worked in several public libraries in Illinois and in Wisconsin. So my background is in librarianship, and then I transitioned to editing, and I do a lot of writing and coverage on things going on in the library world, because it is a world that I'm not wanting to leave, but want to have a role in a different way, if that makes sense. And so really the last 4.5 years have been a lot of coverage of censorship things. I did a lot of that coverage before, but it certainly wasn't as prolific as it is now. And well, as was kind of the prediction in 2021, we've gone from this book needs to be pulled from the shelves to let's just get rid of libraries altogether. So it's been a lot of coverage in the last year on libraries more broadly, and unfortunately what's going on now at the federal level with libraries across the country.
Which I think we not like predicted this, but we're like, well, they're going after this, and they're going after this, and the goal is actually to do this. That's going to be the goal, and they're just framing it this way. Hate being right.
I know. I'm like, I wish I could have been wrong. I wish that all the people in 2021 who were like, you are like absolutely, crazy for saying this. You are, you're fear mongering. I wish I had been like, but alas, I will say, some of the tactics have been surprising, even for like as much as has been kind of there and easy to predict. But I think that the speed of it and the lack of action to solve some of this has been surprising.
Yeah, honestly, the IMLS stuff and like firing Carla. That honestly, like, once the administration kicked in, I was like, oh, they're gonna do this. But like before that wasn't on the table for me, and I don't know why. So I was like, oh, okay, that's happening.
Well, she went through the first administration, so it was kind of strange to expect it.
Yeah. And, they found ways, to get to libraries in as direct a route as they could by going through the Department of Defense. Like, they were able to knock out a lot of stuff that way. Going through to hit public libraries, there are a few more hoops they had to jump through. And, that's why the IMLS stuff is surprising. And yet it's also, I guess, logically makes some sense.
Yeah.
I think in some ways the IMLS is just kind of it just came up on a list of small federal agencies, because it wasn't eliminated by itself. It was part of other ones in the act.
Right.
Yeah, talking about this over the years, though, one thing that was, I think, around 2022, because we saw the 2021 was, we saw this particular wave of, the groomer obsession, the anti-queer obsession, the red panic around like Emily. We saw this sort of new focus on queer and Black literature as like a reaction to Black Lives Matter, as a reaction to George Floyd protests in particular, and the summer of activism around that. The thing I was always saying was, I was saying around 2022 was, I expect that this sort of internet heavy part of it will go away, and it will be taken up by the people who are like the Facebook grandmas who do the day in, day out kind of work going to meetings. But that hasn't really happened. Like, it has maintained this kind of virality of, it's obviously there's too much other news that crowds it out, but the approach has been kind of exactly the same, which is just that anything about queer people is grooming children, it's inappropriate for children, and that has stuck in a way that I'm kind of surprised that people aren't able to just say queer people are cool. It's good to be gay, and like straight people have really dropped the ball, I think, on saying that, of just being like, this is weird. Why are you saying gay people are, like, knowing about gay people's is in some way grooming or teaching children about sex? It's just teaching them about people who exist, and like, people have really fallen over on that.
They have. And, to be fair, white people fell over covering and responding to Black Lives Matter and to the protests and to the, pulling of books by Black and brown authors, which is where it started. It was, I think, April or May 2021 is when No Left Turn in Education had their first pick the awful book and started all their stuff on it. And they were just they were so successful at this. And one of the reasons is they had some snappy language that they were able to create fear around. The other thing is they were very successful at using places like Facebook and taking advantage of the algorithm that works in their favor on Facebook. And I think that they've really continued to leverage that. I'm thinking about your comment in particular about straight people falling over, not calling out how weird it is to not stand up for queer people. You probably saw this and have likely talked about it yourselves, but part of the bill, the funding and the budget bill in Ohio for state libraries, there's a provision in there that said all public libraries in the state were going to have to move any LGBTQ literature out of eyesight of anybody under the age of 18. We're not just talking restrict, we're talking can't even be in eyesight, right? And so when the folks who were fighting against this bill, which would have decimated libraries financially, were fighting, they purposely did not tackle that part of the bill. So now it's a whole lot of, we have to push back against this. And it's like, wait a minute, you knew that this was in there. You knew this was in there, and you didn't do anything about it.
Well, because to a lot of people, censorship means library doesn't have book anymore. When censorship can mean any type of Emily Knox has talked about this before, where actual censorship is state censorship. If you can get it in the bookstore down the road, it's not necessarily true hardcore censorship. But in a library context, even just labeling it a certain way can be a type of censorship. And so moving it, making it less accessible, even if you still have it, even if people can still technically get it, just by that act of obfuscating it and making it less accessible is a form of censorship.
Emily, since you brought Emily up, Dr. Emily Knox, who is fantastic, she uses the 4 R's as her description of censorship, which is restriction, redaction, removal, and oh goodness, I'm gonna blank on what number 4 is right now because I'm on the spot, but it's 4 R's what library censorship looks like. And so the sexy, to put in quotes here, the sexy type of censorship is the book being pulled from the shelves and being taken out altogether. And it's these other forms of censorship are just as terrible. And what are you, I keep going back to what are you telling your queer patrons, your queer staff? What are you telling straight people when you're okay, we're going to fight for the budget, but we're not going to fight for this provision in the budget where we have to move all these books out of eyesight of anyone under the age of 18? What?
It's a compromise.
Right. Right. And that compromise is throwing a whole group of people under the bus.
And it's weird because you see when they when a legislator does stand up for someone like I can't remember the name of the representative who's trans, but she was on a committee and someone just kept misgendering her, and then the chair of the committee, who's just an older guy, he didn't he didn't have the right words to say what he was trying to say, but he was just like, look, what are you doing? This is disrespectful. Like, what's wrong with you? Which is really all you need to do. Is
Right.
just say, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? This is a weird thing to believe.
Like, I would rather someone use like incorrect, even offensive terminology for me, but not know that it's offensive and is trying to say a good thing than someone who knows the right things to say and is still trying to insult me, you know?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame that it would be a shame on any level that there isn't better advocacy from everybody in the library community over these topics. But it's even more embarrassing and downright shameful that 4 years of this has not led to any better outcomes. 4 years of this has not led to, wait, maybe we should also stand up for queer people in the library at the same time that we're demanding a budget to have these libraries that are meant to represent everybody in our community.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is why you should unionize. I'll just get on my little soapbox and be like, fucking unionize. You can bargain around this. This is changing your work environment, your work conditions. You can bargain around that. God damn it. Okay.
Yeah. I do want to, before we really get into the IMLS stuff, talk about how you got into working at Bookright, because I know we have a lot of people who have different career paths. So how did you go from being in libraries to writing about them?
So while I was working in libraries, I ran a really popular book blog for a long time, and that writing had connected me to a bunch of other bloggers at the time. We're talking, oh my gosh, talking about blogging now in 2025 is wild because it was so popular in like 2007, 8, 9, 10, like, you know, and I made so many great connections at that point that I should say several of those connections were folks who created Book Riot. And so when I was doing this writing, they'd asked if I would consider freelancing for them. I saw it as an opportunity to like reach a different audience, reach a bigger audience than what I was doing with my own blog. And that just, it ended up being a really good fit. I was asked then if I would ever consider working for them. And I was working in a not bad library situation, but it was a part-time situation. And there were some changes in administration at that library that just kind of made it not an ideal fit. And so it was an opportunity I took when it came up, and it's been an opportunity that I've stayed with because it's worked out great. And I've been able to keep in the library world without having to work in a library.
Yeah. So do the DIY thing that you are thinking of doing over the weekend. Spin up your blog, start posting, start making stuff, because you never know where it'll go.
Yeah, for real. And the thing is, even if it doesn't get you a different career, it helps you find your voice, first of all, but it also really connects you to people who you end up creating really powerful relationships with. And that matters. You are able then to build these networks and leverage these networks, especially if you want to fight for the things that are right in your life. Again, it might not change your career, but it can change your life for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, get out there and meet people. Do something that you like and put it out there. There's so many opportunities to do DIY stuff.
And it doesn't have to be perfect. And it shouldn't be perfect because we're all human. And I think it's really important to emphasize, perfection cannot get in the way of you're just doing the thing,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I was doing my digital gardening more religiously, when I had an academic library job, so I had to think of publication ideas more. I was doing a lot of note taking and Zettelkastening and everything. And there was this concept in the digital garden and online note taking space I saw a lot called of learning in public, working with the garage door open kind of thing, and being vulnerable enough to show a thought in process and not a perfected thought to the world, to show how your thoughts, the things you're thinking about and things you're working on, how they change. And that it's not giving yourself space to show that change and to that be as important as whatever finished product. It's scary, but it's fun. Highly recommend it.
And it's great because that connects you with people too. The number of people who have reached out to me who, they aren't necessarily writers or bloggers. They have whatever their creative passion is. And they'll say something like, wow, it's been cool to watch you go from this point to this point, and that matters. Showing people you grow, you change, you learn. And yet at the core, they're still you. It's still your voice. And there's a lot of things we could say about the internet, good and bad, but like one of the cool things is you can really watch yourself grow and learn and change and develop. And yet you can only do that if you start, if you try, if you put it out there.
Yeah. So I know we have a lot of people early in their career, and I just think it's good to. This is probably like the best advice I can give people is just follow your interests and also just put something out there, because then you'll meet people who also make things, and people who make things are sexy, and people want to talk to you, and people want to like see what you're all about. So,
Truly, really and truly. And I mean, I don't know. I think back like when I started in libraries and it's like blogging was the big thing, but now there are so many cool outlets and so many different ways to create and engage. And it's like, pick something, run with it. Hey, if it sucks, do something different. That's okay. Like
Yeah.
we all have all these little like I love the digital gardening like metaphor. I'm gonna run with it, but we all have these like little seeds and plants that we've put everywhere. And we find the thing that then works really well and we tend to it.
Mhm. So, as far as like the work you've been doing for Book Riot, how do you keep tracking the IMLS stuff as it comes out? Because I put a lot of stuff in the notes document about like local stories in case we want to talk about impact, because it seems really hard to track aside from like the big cases.
Oh, it is. So I have been actively tracking like as many book censorship related stories as I can since really early 2021. And a lot of what I do is constantly update the keywords that I'm searching. And I tend to search every day. I know some people are like, why wouldn't you just set up an alert? I don't trust that. I feel like it misses stuff and it doesn't give me the opportunity to like really look at every single thing, because even if you put in a keyword, sometimes it pulls up garbage. Other times it misses good stuff. So it's a labor of love and frustration at the same time. But so I've got that piece of it. The other piece of it is that I've built so many connections that folks are excited. I shouldn't say excited. Folks are no, excited is the right word. Excited to share with me the things that they find and the things that are important to them, knowing that I can then share it with my network.
Mhm.
And so I've got a couple of folks who are especially invested in the IMLS story because it impacts them personally in some capacity. And so there have been a number of people who've been just like on top of sharing this stuff with me. And like, I'm so appreciative of that because then I can work from something. You can track the cases, you could track the news stories, but sometimes you miss it. Sometimes it doesn't show up. We all know that Google search has just gone. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yes.
Okay. Google search has just gone to shit, right? And like, no matter how good we are as librarians in searching for stuff, we miss things, or it's a crapshoot what you aren't going to find. And so I'm really grateful to folks who are like, this is the thing that they are tracking, and so they're then able to share it with me. I'm gonna like zoom out a little bit here and say, one of the things that I constantly tell people who want to get engaged in any kind of activism is to pick one thing that you're passionate about and like let that be your thing. Because whatever terrible thing is happening within that world is probably happening in other areas of the world. And there are people like you who have made that their focus. So you don't have to do it all. You can't. And so I'm deeply appreciative of people who are taking this particular issue, IMLS, and making it their one thing and then sharing it so that I can then spread it out. And so other organizations can spread that information out. And so that I can, keep people as up to date as possible on this. It's been really interesting because there were a number of updates this week to what's going on with the IMLS. And I feel like even the outlets that I tend to turn to and think that are really good have not covered the stuff.
No, I've been hearing most of it from you.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because it's not getting well publicized, which is very likely. And also, I think that there's just such a fire hose that trying to keep up with it at this point is like we're all doing our best.
So, where should we pick up? I guess we should start kind of from the beginning. So, it was an executive order gutting the IMLS, firing every single person in it. And there are two lawsuits. Could you give us the overview of the two main lawsuits going on?
Sure. So there's two lawsuits. One is Rhode Island versus Trump, and this is a lawsuit that involves 21 state attorneys generals suing the Trump administration over the gutting of the IMLS. The second lawsuit is ALA and Asks Me are filing a lawsuit against Keith Sonderling, and theirs is also against the dismantling of the IMLS. So these are two lawsuits pretty much covering the same thing, but they do have some differences to them. Right now, both have had some action on them. I'm going to start with the ALA case because this one is a little bit easier, I guess, at this point. The judge in that case has issued a temporary restraining order, which says that the Trump administration cannot do any more damage to the IMLS right now. Like, that is what the order is. That case is going to continue to proceed, and we'll likely hear more on that before the end of the month, is what I'm hearing in terms of, like, my sources are saying end of the month. The temporary restraining order was put in place because of a date that would have allowed for, like, further firing of staff, if I'm remembering this correctly. So they got that temporary restraining order to stop further firings. That's the ALA case. The case with the state's attorneys general had a ruling last week that said that the administration needed to undo everything that they had done, and they could do no further damage. It was an injunction in the case. So that order came, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday. Friday afternoon, there was a notice that went out that the Trump administration was going to appeal this. Not surprising. But we didn't know at that point, like, what the appeal would look like. Fast forward to, what day is it today? Wednesday. So Tuesday, I believe it was Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday. The appeal was to get a stay in the injunction, which would allow the Trump administration to ignore what the judge had said that they had to do, and allow them to continue as is. In theory, because of the decision in the ALA case, they would not be able to do more damage to the IMLS. But we know how this administration has been when it comes to rulings to the law. Like, nothing probably would have stopped. So that was the latest on that. But a couple of really interesting things came up in this attorney general's case. One, Keith Sonderling put in a, I can't remember the name of it. I'm looking really quick to remember the name of, like, what this document was called. A declaration. And basically he bashed the IMLS staff. He said that if the folks who were fired were to come back, they would create a toxic work environment, that they had been seeding information about what was going on with the IMLS. Like, it was this, I think it was 19 points. He claimed that reemploying staff members would cost the agency, $900,000 a month that they couldn't afford. And he said that only about 100 grants would remain. Like, it read as if it was full of disdain for the entire agency and everybody who worked in it, as well as all of its purposes, which we know was the intent.
Right.
So there was an update, status update given yesterday in the court. So in the ruling with the injunction, the defendant, so Trump's side, had to say, like, what they were doing to, like, meet the order. And one of the things that came up that I think maybe hasn't been publicized very well, it certainly was news to me, is that any decision made in the case with the 21 state attorney generals is only going to apply to those states. So in the rest of the United States, where the state attorneys general did not get involved in this lawsuit, the federal government doesn't have to reinstall those grants that were pulled from them. And as you probably can guess, the states that are filing the lawsuit are your blue states, are your states that have been a little bit more proactive in protecting the right to read, a little bit more proactive in protecting their libraries. And so the same victims who are going to be most damaged by the gutting of the IMLS are still going to be damaged, even if this lawsuit does, pan out in favor of the state attorneys general.
I do want to say, as someone in one of those cushy blue states, they might be your city, your state, your library administration will do a lot of talking about protecting libraries, that libraries are under attack, and they won't say dick about library workers. and they will throw you under the bus. I don't care where you are. Just FYI.
Yeah, and they they're not going to come out and say what they should say, which is that this is about people of color and queer people and people who are not, modeled after what the Trump administration calls the American citizen, which is not any of us, probably.
It's also going to greatly impact rural communities, which are going to be the most impacted by, interlibrary loan services that are affected. And it's not mentioned in the update that the defense put in that you mentioned. But I also imagine, because you can read this and it'll sort of show you how the government's dragging its feet about rehiring people, because it's also using it as an opportunity to be like, well, people who are remote workers need to report in person to the DC offices, which obviously people can't relocate in time. There's also something with one of their unions, so that they are on paid administrative leave if they're in the union, so that the union has time to renegotiate based on the return to office stuff.
Yep.
But I imagine something that's not mentioned, and I wonder if they will try to not reinstate employees that are remote in states that are not part of the suit.
Oh, that I don't know. That's a really good question.
It's not mentioned, but because the section is, as to grants and contracts, the agency defendants have been working to reinstate grants. After conferring with the plaintiffs, defendants confirmed their understanding that the injunction only applies to plaintiff states. So the plaintiffs agree that this only applies to them. So, but it depends where IMLS has people hired, I imagine.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I don't know how many of their workers are remote. I would imagine, because it's a fairly small agency. If they're remote, they probably are local to DC or in the DMV area as opposed to across the country. But I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, I don't know if there's field offices or anything in some areas or regional offices but I guess most of that's probably done through grants. Anything that's done outside the DC area is just done through a grant. So you're not an employee of IMLS.
And we know too, so the grants to states go through the state libraries. And one of the things that started to pop up this year that hadn't quite popped up in the previous few years is that at least 3 states tried to kill their state libraries this year. Those are South Dakota, Arkansas, and New Hampshire. It didn't succeed in any of those states, though. In Arkansas, they did succeed in abolishing the board overseeing the state library and having that reappointed by their lovely governor down there. But if states don't have state libraries, then the IMLS doesn't have to distribute money, because who's going to pass it on? And so that was a really interesting convergence of things happening. If you can't get rid of the IMLS straight out, maybe you get rid of the state libraries so that the IMLS cannot distribute grants to states, because who's going to give that money where it belongs?
Mm-hmm. So I think that more or less brings us up to date on the status of the IMLS.
Yeah.
What's your plan covering this going forward?
So, excuse me. I'm going to continue to cover it, and I really hope that it continues to get more coverage than just me. And I hope that we see really smart takes on what it actually means, what it'll look like when it plays out. Every library has done a really great job mobilizing people. And so I see them continuing to do that same thing. At this point, we are doing a lot of waiting for what the next judgment's going to be, what the next news we'll hear about is going to be. But one of the things that I think is worth mentioning is being really realistic about this. Both these court cases are going to be tied up in the system for a long time, and that is intentional. The Trump budget, as it currently stands, defunds the IMLS anyway. So if they can continue to kick that can with the lawsuits to October 1st, it won't matter what the decisions are if there's no money for the IMLS. So really right now, it's what's going to happen between, the end of May and the start of October. And that's going to be both what these 2 court cases end up saying, as well as what the budget looks like. And we'll get a sense of what the reality of IMLS is probably through this summer as we see those 2 pieces play out.
Yeah, I I wonder because I've been running a Google alert just kind of to get a feel of what the reporting looking at IMLS programs ending locally looks like. So I've been saving up, these
Mhm.
local news stories and seeing what do you imagine will be most effective? Because I think raising a stink about it is always better because it can influence the judges if the national conversation is there. It obviously will influence the budget. So groups like Every Library or like the ALA, like what should they be focusing on, do you think, in terms of like messaging right now around the IMLS?
That's a good question and a tough question.
Yeah.
I the messaging was bad from the start. There was a lot of misinformation going around about what would be impacted here, and I think that some opportunity to alert people was lost because of that. And for example, here's the thing that like stood out to me is how many people were spreading the message that this would cut Libby. And it's like this is not about Libby. Yes, it will impact some ebook and material services in some states who use this grant money to fund these services.
Mhm.
That's one piece. So like in terms of messaging, like we got to stop with the misinformation and like be very clear on what's going to happen. The reality is the services that are going to be most impacted are going to be those that the messaging is just not going to be as sexy as they're going to kill Libby. Tribal libraries are going to be devastated by this.
Mhm.
Prison libraries are going to be devastated by this. There's two populations that are difficult for the average white American citizen in Trump's America to think about or to understand, like what impact that loss will really have on these populations. As library workers who are socially engaged and conscious of what the impact is, like there's tremendous messaging there. There's tremendous things we can talk about, but how do we get that like message to the average person? How do we do that? I think that's a big question mark, right? And particularly when it comes to prisons, because we love our prisons, but we don't want to talk about the fact that prisons are the number one place of censorship in this country, and it's always been that way. So that's part of the challenge. The other part of the challenge is like, man, there's just been so many people who are like good. The leopards ate their faces when it comes to rural services and to like, red states don't deserve the hate that they get because they are in situations where politically, like that has just been entrenched, where voters have been disenfranchised. And so while I'm also in a blue state that's nice and cushy, I always like to say like, I don't have the right to like be proud of that. Like it's my job to work harder to make sure that my neighbors in all the red states around me also have access to information and to facts and to, all of these things that it's so easy to just be like, well, I'm fine here in Illinois. It's like the reality is one, no,
Yeah.
I'm not. But two, like I give a shit about people in Iowa too, and I want them to have library resources. I want them to have access to information. I want them to have a robust interlibrary loan system. And so my job is to continue to educate around that and continue to say, like, we need to give a shit about our neighbors.
Yeah, there's no such thing truly as a red state or a blue state.
Right.
What is true is in some states, gerrymandering has
Yep.
been extremely effective.
Yep.
I'm from
I mean,
Illinois originally. Illinois is not a blue state. Chicago's blue.
Yep. Yep.
The rest of it, the town where I'm from is a sundown town,
Mm-hmm.
and that's in Illinois. So,
And I mean,
like,
if you want to get into that, I mean,
Yeah.
Illinois had the most sundown towns, has
Yep.
the most sundown towns
Yep.
of any state in the country. And so it's like, it's
Yeah.
so easy to like sit back and think that it's like, well, you don't know anything about the history of the state,
Yeah.
But that's so coming back to your question and trying to like circle back to it. It's so tough because these are topics that we have been like screaming about for how long, and how important it is to stand up for marginalized people and for people who these services are so crucial to their everyday existence. And yet, you then have I'm tired of having empathy for people, and these people got what they voted for. And also all of the issues we have around talking about things like prisons. I didn't answer your question, except I think I answered your question at the same time. It's a big
Yeah.
question mark, right? And it's
Like one thing I would like to see is, a website where you can put in your zip code and say, how has IMLS been defunded? Because you can still make the fight about the defunding
Hmm.
to get people involved. Like, how has it affected you? And a lot of people it's not going to, but the kind of stories that I was paying attention to were like, local, like Virginia Beach MoCA Museum of Contemporary Art had a grant terminated. Like, you can find something within, a couple hundred miles of most people that is going to be relevant to something they could have enjoyed. And this is like your money being taken away, your services.
There's a really great website through Minnesota. I'm trying to remember. I put it in our, we had this like handy little document here, and I dropped in the Minnesota government had created a federal funding disruptions website where you could like see where the temporary disruptions were, the permanent cancellations, and then like what's tied up in the courts. But I could not find anything in there IMLS specific. So I don't know what grants they're looking at or like what federal money they're looking at, but something like this that focused on IMLS would be spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you can just go in and be like, my zip code is this. What is impacted within a 100-mile radius, and you're gonna find something. I think a lot of people missed that when the IMLS was gutted, 3 states lost all of their funding: California, Washington, and Connecticut. So, in most of the cases, the grant given to individual institutions or to projects were cut. In the case of these 3 states, it was everything to these 3 states. And the reason that those 3 states lost their funding was because they had the word equity in there. Because when they applied for the money, part of what they have to do as states is include equity in how they're going to distribute that money. That was the red flag to get their funding pulled. It has since been theoretically restored, but like that is how, one, haphazard all these cuts were, but two, also how targeted they were. So I can't imagine that if people in these states knew that that was happening, that there wouldn't be more shouting, more protesting, more making a stink about it.
And like also, no matter what kind of library you're at, it's not just IMLS grants and funding getting cut that will affect you. I'm at a public library and we had a newspaper digitization program that
Mhm.
was through the
NEA or
yeah, or
NEA,
like
yeah,
through the NEH, right? And
yeah.
so like that, because we keep being like, oh, we're not going to be affected by IMLS too much, blah 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 blah. But then like this huge program that we had is just gone
Hmm.
through another grant. The Homosaurus right now, we're like, how many of us are moving to Canada so that like Homosaurus can be based in Canada instead of having to rely on grants from the United States because like we're all volunteer, right? And like we have to have money to do things somehow. Like there's things outside of the IMLS that are still affecting libraries too.
For sure. And
Yeah.
you brought up the newspaper digitization project like that. The last I saw on that was, that is there's the National Newspaper Digitization Project. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's run through the Library of Congress, and that funding
Mm,
stopped.
yeah.
So while what's there won't go away, they won't be adding to it.
Yeah.
And we know how important that project has been for as long as it's been running, and how many people take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where next? One thing I wanted to talk about is what has this disruption already caused in lost momentum? Because obviously the grant cycle takes a very long time. So what kind of impact, like, how could we even begin to wrap our heads around what kind of impact this has for, let's limit it to libraries and like IMLS stuff.
You are asking like the most impossible questions.
Uh-huh.
And I know that's intentional. But I don't have an answer, and I think that's because we don't know yet. And
Yeah.
part of the reason we don't know is because it has been so effing chaotic. The grants cut 1 minute, and then you get a letter that says, "Oh, just kidding, it's reinstalled." But I don't think people have actually seen the money yet. And
Hmm.
so it's a big question of like, will the money actually show up? I've been thinking about so I'm on my library's friends board of the Friends of the Library. And one of the things that has come up is one, as a friends group, there was some messaging that went out about what happened with the IMLS. And I thought that that was like such a smart move to inform people who care about the library about what's going on. And also to maybe help the library out without having to be on the spot about answering all these questions. But one of the things that was reported to us is that, the one of the consortiums here has been working to figure out what they're going to be able to cover, what they're going to see in terms of their member libraries. The big libraries here are going to be fine. And by big libraries, I mean suburban libraries. The funding, from IMLS, like, is such a small portion of the funds that it's not going to make a big impact. However, the rural libraries, the small libraries that are part of the consortium are going to be devastated by this because they require so much more of that money. And so, it's hard to say right in this moment what that's going to look like, but it's not hard to predict that we're going to continue to see libraries that are doing fine continue to do fine, and those libraries that are smaller, more rural, that do not have a robust like tax base, not do so fine. An interesting thing that I noticed this week is one of the other things that I've been tracking and not really writing about or covering, but just like tracking for my own interest is library layoffs and library budget cuts over the last year, because they have been showing up a lot more. This week alone, I saw two different libraries see that the county cut funding from their budget, not the city, but the county. And so I'm wondering if we're going to see more of that too, further impact, especially these small libraries that depend on a bigger like area to get some of their budget. So the answer is we don't know, but also we know. And that's going, as those smaller libraries then struggle, that is going to have an impact on the bigger libraries too, who are providing more services with less money, because they want to provide those services, but their tax base isn't growing either. So I hope that answers your question, but I know it's not the answer that I think is most helpful.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm one thing I'm really worried about is the fact that, once this money disappears and momentum is lost, we're really not going to see any of the states stepping up to fill that funding gap. And this is, you talked about like seeing libraries disappear. This is a really effective way for a lot of states to decrease the number of their public library obligations.
Totally. And that is what was, at stake and purposely behind the bills to get rid of those state libraries too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for some states, the destruction of the IMLS is their permission slip to like really go at it.
Yeah, it's always the discussion of, if we didn't already have public libraries, how politically impossible it would be to create them.
Yep.
But it's not politically impossible to lose them, and then
Nope.
recreating them is still politically very difficult. I mean, some communities we talked about, like the Patmos Public Library. The community just defunded their own library and just said, for 3 years, and just said we're not. It took a long time to get the community to care enough to reinstate that funding. It's not impossible, but it's really, really difficult.
And I'm sure you've seen the update on that too. They had to close their doors last week because 5 staff members left. They're sick of being harassed. They're sick of the toxic environment. And so, that's the other thing that comes with it. Okay, finally they got their funding, but what strings are attached to it? And when it is a profession that is already at the edge of burnout, what happens when there's even more pressure applied to these folks who've been through the ringer? They give up. And, we can be mad about that. And I think there's some fair feelings there, but also can we blame them for being like, I can't be paid $15 an hour to be called a groomer and harassed for the rest of my life,
Yeah, like this is one reason I've been like for years railing against the fact that like for so many people, librarian or not librarian, like public libraries are synonymous with children. That like public libraries are for children and that's what they're for. And every fucking keynote you go to at a stupid conference, it's always someone being like, and my stupid kid loves the library. And when I was a stupid kid, the librarian showed me books and wow, look at where I am now. And like, sure, that's great. But like this, like associate like the Lee Edelman in my who lives in my head, who's just like, children are bad. Like the capital C child that is associated with public libraries in particular, like that I believe people who support libraries have been trying to reinforce is also part of how like those who want to destroy libraries are doing it, is you associate it with children, and then you can show, and now these are a threat to children, and then the well-meaning people go, but oh, I care about the children too, and so we have to get rid of this, right? Like it's the same kind of like reproductive futurism that Lee Edelman talks about, of like caring about like a future non-existent child and their safety over like actual existing conditions and
Yep.
people who exist.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm begging people to, like, when you talk about libraries, please stop just mentioning them in relation to children, because it's actually not helping. I think it's hurting.
Well, and it also is just it's BS too, because none of these people actually care about the rights of children. And
Exactly. Yeah.
that's an issue that I think needs to be really dug into, that children are the most marginalized group in this country.
They
And
are. Yes.
who's standing up for their rights? They are. But are we listening to them? No.
Nope.
Because we know better. But yeah, you bring up a really great point, and you also bring up, the opportunity to mention that, it's librarians, continue to be seen as it continues to be seen as a gendered profession, and so you've got that issue with it as well, and so that impacts the kind of activism we see around it. It impacts the kind of self-advocacy that happens within libraries and that stuff. Man, if it could have started in 2021, maybe we'd be in a different place right now, but we're not. And so what do we do looking forward? Like, it's very hard for me to like put anything on, because I'm like, I told you 4 years ago what could have helped. I don't know now. Like, we are in a very different place now, that I don't think any of us have ever been before, and we don't have a great place to like pull from historically, like what happens now. I don't know.
Caveat that while I call kids stupid, they are, yes, the full
Yeah,
autonomy and rights for children.
yeah.
I'm
I
just a
I knew
hater.
what you were saying. No, I knew what you're saying.
No, kids don't
Hypothetical
deserve
child.
rights. Total sea change here. I'm bad now. No, whatever.
No. I know what you mean though. Like there's an infantilization of
Yes, that's a better word
children.
for it.
Yeah.
The Lee Edelman who lives in my head, who is a constant character on this podcast. Yeah.
I still haven't read No Future, but I will eventually. Yeah, I just read the reporting on the Patmos Library. I hadn't heard about that.
No, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, like literally
5
last
people.
week. Hmm.
Yeah, 5 people walking off the job, and, which yeah, good for them.
Right.
But it's very the reporting on it is very well. It's whatever. They go over the background, but then they're like, Deb McCullough, executive director of the Michigan Library Association, said tensions have been high at a handful of public libraries around the state in recent years over sexual-themed books on the shelves. Too often we're faced at views that are so far right and so far left. I'm sorry, but like, how many like leftist outlets are there and that she's hearing from?
I don't.
She listens to us.
I think that in general, like reporting on libraries is pretty bad.
Yeah.
So if only we still had a robust local news ecosystem, we also wouldn't have necessarily ended up in this place. I
Yeah.
just saw this. I'm gonna call it a tweet on Blue Sky, even though that's not what it's called. But
It's whatever.
there was a quote tweet to somebody who was saying, they're looking. Rich mega donors on the Democratic side are looking to find the next, the left Joe Rogan, blah, 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 blah. And somebody quote tweeted and is like, you know what? What if we just reintroduce local news everywhere? Wrote about the local restaurants that have opened, the sports games, and then how the GOP is screwing everybody over. Like, the results would be a lot better than looking for Joe Rogan. It's like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Imagine if we did have a local news ecosystem still that would cover local stuff and keep people informed about what the GOP really is doing in their communities, and to them and to their rights and their democratic institutions. I can go on and on, but Anyway, that was kind of an aside that I just needed to vent about local news.
Form
This is the
relationships
place.
with your local like independent reporters or independent reporters that cover libraries or labor issues or things like that. Like I went to a labor conference at UMass Amherst a couple of months ago, and there was a whole panel of independent labor journalists, including Kim Kelly. I got to meet Kim Kelly. It was really cool. Oh my God. That's just a side note. But like they were like, please develop relationships like with individual reporters, especially who you might give exclusive stories to, because these are, especially if it's like to do with workers who have
Mhm.
lives and interests, like those are interesting stories we want to write about, and we want to get to know you as people and share your story. So like reach out to cool people like you and like other people, like develop those relationships like that. You might not think that like what your library is going through is like newsworthy or important, but like it probably is. Like there's always shit happening.
Yeah, and the number of stories that I can't cover is massive, but it is really helpful to even hear from people about what's going on because that is stuff that I, one, carry with me, but two, informs like how I think about and write about these issues and how I talk about these issues. Like, I do get to keynote some of these library conferences sometimes, which is great. And I don't talk about my time as a kid in the library. I talk about censorship and what's going on in libraries, but
Thank
like,
God.
um, but like those stories I hear from people are really useful because they do give more context and more nuance to what's actually happening on the ground. That's where I'm ending that one. But yes, independent journalism, I think, is so essential right now. Like I know it's essential right now, but I think it will continue to grow. It's just, and the number of people who are doing it who are already working full-time jobs. That's the other piece of it is just like our news system is so screwed up and people got to eat. So it's hard to also find the balance of what is free, what do I, ask people to pay for. That is like a whole podcast in and of
Hmm.
itself.
Yeah, I've seen some interesting stuff that 4 Media used to talk about, like what gets behind a email wall, what goes behind an actual paywall, and like how do they, balance the need to like stay solvent as a media company and also like get information out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say that, and since starting the censorship stuff, like my biggest beef has been how many of these censorship stories are behind paywalls, which means that nobody in the community knows that books are being banned in their libraries or in their public schools because they can't find out. Meanwhile, they can Google what they've heard going around town and find the Facebook page for their local Moms for Liberty. That's free and
Mm.
open, and they get that angle on the story rather than the actual story itself. And that's really another reason that they have been so successful in their campaigns is their garbage is free. Meanwhile, you want to go to your local. It's not even going to be a local news. It's going to be a regional news, likely for the biggest metropolitan area near you. And it's going to be behind a paywall, so you don't know actually
Yep.
what's going on. And bless libraries because there are some incredible databases where you can get that information, but that is another hurdle for folks who are just like, I just want to know the news. I'm not going to go to my library's website, to the news bank to log in. Um,
Mm.
and that's not the library's fault. It's a fault of the system.
Yeah. On that happy note,
Sorry.
I think we can wrap there for tonight. Kelly, is there anything that you want people to check out? Where should they go? Should they follow you on social media or should they leave you alone?
No. You're welcome to follow me on social media. I'm Hey Kelly Jensen on Blue Sky. I if there's anything you want to follow of mine, I would suggest the Book Riot Literary Activism newsletter. It's free. That information will not go behind a paywall. We're playing with paywall stuff too, but this information is so important that it's not going to be behind a paywall. And I guess the takeaway I have here is how important it is to one, support your local library, and that is not just going and getting a library card and checking out books. Like those are great things. That is not activism on part of your library. Actually show up to board meetings, run for board if you can. Get to the polls and vote in library elections and public school elections. Public schools and public libraries have a lot in common when it comes to what's going on right now. So I always tie those two together. Thinking bigger on the national level, write to your representatives, get on the phone with them, tell them that you want IMLS funding restored. If your state attorney general is part of the lawsuit, write them and thank them for being part of the lawsuit. If your state attorney general is not part of the lawsuit, get on the phone with them and ask them why they are not part of it and what this means for the people in your state. I think those are some decent action steps for now. There's a million other things you can do. I assume that your listeners have a good grasp on how to be engaged in the fight. So,
Oh,
but yeah, I mean,
it doesn't hurt to check. It doesn't hurt to know.
it doesn't. But I also
Well,
don't
I
want
was just saying,
What?
I wasn't making fun of anyone.
Listeners
why you
cannot
read it
see
that
the
way.
face he made. He was like, well.
I couldn't see the face I made, so I have no idea.
I didn't see a face because I was talking to my microphone.
There you go.
But I mean, it is important to pay attention to what's going on and do something with it. And as I said before, like I'm a big proponent of the pick the one thing and really go all in on that. That is the best way to like save your brain space, to like save your humanity rather than trying to do it all. But it's always worth, at least keeping tabs on what's going on. So I tell librarians, if you subscribe to the Literary Activism newsletter, I certainly do not anticipate or expect that you're going to click all 150 bajillion links that are in there every single week about all the terrible things that are happening. However, you can save that newsletter and you can search in your inbox for a particular state or a particular library or a particular politician, and that stuff's going to pop up. Then you've got an archive of what's happened. It's a research tool. It's an archive as much as it is a roundup of like what is happening in this moment.
Yeah, that's how I use a lot of my Google alerts too. Is I'm not going to look at them as they come in, but I often will go back and start pulling things together for an episode or something. So.
Yeah. And I mean, I think about something like Patmos, right? Like that library has had a 4-year history here, and we can pull it up real quick just doing a Patmos search. All the links are there, Yeah, I mean, this is not an uplifting moment. It's not an exciting moment. And I think that there are a lot more questions than there are answers or guesses about what could happen. But the folks who are advocating and doing activism around libraries are going to continue doing that. I have been particularly heartened watching average parents showing up and like building these incredible networks and incredible systems to push back. And that helps me as somebody who is easily frustrated and cynical over the whole thing, being like, man, that mom in Florida who otherwise would never have cared, like created this whole thing and is now like in the ears of everybody in that state all the time. That stuff matters. And seeing that happen, is like, that is what we want to see happen. And I think and hope we will see more of that happening as people better understand the real scope of what's happening on the national level now. So I guess that's an optimistic note to end on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jay, you have something to promote?
Yeah. So thinking about like how library workers in particular can like face this moment, especially like organizing as workers, right? Like how do we get these things in our collective bargaining agreements? How do we unionize, etc.? I know a lot of people have been very scared about like threats to the NLRB and like increasingly like anti-union environments, even in quote unquote cushy blue states, right? And a couple months ago, I shared like an interview that a comrade in North Carolina did about organizing in the South. Like public sector workers can't collectively bargain in North Carolina, for example, but you can still unionize. And so how do you do that? I have that same comrade and some more are doing a whole like webinar panel about like organizing in the South and what that looks like. Like, how do you do labor organizing outside of the National Labor Relations Act? There's going to be a public healthcare worker on this webinar. There's going to be a public school teacher, a public higher ed worker, and a public librarian. And all of these struggles are linked and interconnected. And so if folks are interested in like learning about like how especially people in the South have been doing successful labor organizing, and if you are wanting to like learn how to do labor organizing at your, if you are a public sector worker as like a librarian, I will have the link in the notes. That's going to be June 8th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Central, and 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's free. So.
Yeah, and before I forget, we have a live show coming up
Oh, that's
during
right.
ALA.
That's the thing we have.
There are still tickets available June 28th if you are in Philly or if you are just attending ALA. We also have a conference sticker fundraiser. So if you would like to get a conference sticker that says Library Punk on it, that helps get us out there since we do not have funding to go from work. So that will help get all of the hosts into Philly. And also,
It's going to be great.
people
It's
have
going to
been
be with
asking.
Library Futures and Jenny, who we've had on before, and Allison from Library Freedom Project are going to be our two guests. So it's going to be a party.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Kelly, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. And, hopefully a year from now, we can reconvene and have some better news on the IMLS, and if not, well, we keep on keeping on and doing what we have to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I don't have to do my usual outro, so good night.
Woo.